the nation froze. What started as a routine congressional hearing turned into a live television spectacle that no one could look away from. Cameras flashed like lightning in a storm, capturing every twitch of tension that hung thick in the air. At the center of it all, Representative Jasmine Crockett, steady as stone, eyes locked on the witness chair where Ivanka Trump sat, framed by lights, legacy, and the weight of her family name. Across the screen, millions watched. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. Even before a word was spoken, something felt different. The silence wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that comes before a reckoning. Ivanka smiled, polished and composed, the image of practiced grace. But beneath that poise, something flickered, an unease she couldn't hide. And then it happened. Crockett leaned forward, voice calm yet cutting, and asked the question that sliced through the ceremony of power like a blade through silk. The words landed with precision, echoing off marble walls and across the country, measured, undeniable, unforgettable. For a moment, no one moved. Ivanka's eyes darted. The corners of her father's mouth tightened. In a side feed, Donald Trump's reaction filled the screens, jaw clenched, face flushed with disbelief, a man watching his dynasty be challenged in real time. He shifted forward, muttering something under his breath as the clip began to loop online before the broadcast even ended. Social media ignited like wildfire. Hashtags erupted. Commentators tripped over themselves trying to label what they'd just witnessed. An ambush, a reckoning, a generational collision. Within minutes, edits, remixes, and reaction videos flooded every feed. One headline screamed, "Crockett versus Trump," the moment America stopped scrolling. But amid the chaos, Crockett remained composed. Her expression didn't change. She simply gathered her notes, her silence saying more than any rebuttal could, because this wasn't just politics. It was a mirror moment. The clash of two Americas, one built on inherited power, the other on earned truth, and as the crowd buzzed, as Ivanka tried to recover her smile, one truth became clear. Something irreversible had begun. But to understand how one woman's words shook a former president's empire, we have to go back to where this confrontation began. Long before the cameras started rolling, the air in the hearing room felt charged, like static before a thunderstorm. Everyone sensed it, though no one dared say it aloud. The press had gathered in unusually high numbers that morning, whispering about Ivanka Trump's surprise appearance. Officially, she was there to speak about women's entrepreneurship initiatives. Unofficially, everyone knew it was an image play, a bid to reframe the Trump name as polished, compassionate, untouchable. Meanwhile, at the far end of the dais, Representative Jasmine Crockett flipped through her notes in silence, calm, observant, unassuming. But her eyes told another story, one of careful study, of patience waiting for the exact moment truth could land where it hurt most. She wasn't interested in spectacle. She was interested in accountability. As Ivanka began her opening statement, her tone was rehearsed, every word smooth as glass. "My goal has always been to empower women across America," she said, the kind of line that sounded perfect in a campaign ad, but hollow in a chamber built for truth. A few heads nodded out of politeness. Others didn't bother to hide their skepticism. Crockett's pen stopped moving. Outside the building, headlines were already warming up. Ivanka returns to Washington. The next chapter of the Trump legacy. The old machinery of privilege was starting to hum again. But inside, something was shifting, a subtle, silent resistance gathering its weight behind one Congresswoman's gaze. She'd seen this dance before. The photo ops, the charity buzzwords, the soft smiles masking the hard truths. Crockett's voice stayed steady as she waited her turn, her questions sharp in her mind, her timing precise. This wasn't anger. This was purpose. Even as Ivanka smiled toward the cameras, somewhere deep down she must have felt it. The sense that her stage was no longer hers. That the spotlight had begun to tilt. And beyond those walls, America watched, sensing that what was about to unfold wasn't just another political moment. It was something bigger, an unmasking, a collision of two worlds, inherited ease and earned strength. The setup was complete. The spark was seconds away. And when it came, it would burn brighter than anyone expected. Ivanka Trump had always been the calm center of the storm. While her father thundered, she glided. Where he provoked, she posed. Her brand was balance, the unruffled daughter who smiled through scandal, the voice of reason in a dynasty of defiance. But behind that polished veneer was a machinery of image, precision engineered to protect the family name at all costs. That morning her appearance seemed flawless. A soft-colored suit, pearls, a measured smile, every inch curated to signal composure. The cameras adored her. She knew how to hold a gaze, how to pause just long enough for a flattering cutaway. But even perfect choreography can't hide the cracks when truth starts to press against the surface. As she spoke, her confidence carried a subtle tremor. She quoted statistics, repeated buzzwords, but the sincerity didn't quite reach her eyes. It was as if she were playing a role she'd rehearsed one too many times. For years, the world had treated her as the palatable face of the Trump empire. Charming, polished, seemingly apolitical. Yet beneath the gloss lay privilege polished into performance. When questions began, her rhythm faltered. A senator asked about ethics compliance. She pivoted gracefully. Another pressed about business ties. She smiled and rephrased. Every answer sounded right, but none felt true. Crockett noticed the small flicker at the edge of Ivanka's mouth when cornered. The half-second pause before a too-perfect reply. To the cameras, she was unshaken. To those watching closely, she was cornered by her own composure. The very grace that once shielded her now began to betray her. Too smooth, too practiced, too detached from the tension around her. And as the minutes passed, the illusion began to fray. The reporters in the back exchanged knowing glances. Viewers online started to comment, "She's dodging again. She's not answering. Something's off." It was the beginning of the unraveling, not through scandal or outburst, but through the quiet collapse of credibility. And across the table, Jasmine Crockett waited, silent, steady, eyes locked, not with hostility, but with purpose. She could sense the facade bending, ready to break. And when it did, the entire room would feel the weight of what came next. Before she ever stepped into that hearing room, Jasmine Crockett had already fought a lifetime's worth of battles. Long before the cameras, before Congress, before the title of representative, there was a young woman raised on the South Side, learning early that silence is the easiest way to disappear, and that she would never choose it. Her story wasn't written in luxury or legacy. It was carved through persistence, through showing up when others counted her out. In college, she studied late while working 2 jobs, driven not by ambition alone but by a fire to understand the system that so often failed the people she loved. Law school only sharpened that fire. She didn't dream of corporate offices or polished boardrooms. She wanted courtrooms, protests, the kind of places where justice wasn't abstract. It was personal. When she became a public defender, she saw the truth up close. Families torn apart, lives reduced to case numbers, and the quiet cruelty of a system that protected power more than people. That was where she learned composure, not as a performance, but as a weapon. Calm wasn't compliance. It was control, and that control became her armor. Each time she stood in front of a judge or an angry crowd, she learned that power trembles not at shouting, but at certainty. When she entered politics, critics dismissed her. Too direct, too emotional, too unwilling to play along. But the people, the ones who'd been unheard for too long, saw themselves in her. She wasn't speaking at them. She was speaking for them. Her cadence, her conviction, her refusal to shrink for anyone. It all built a following that stretched far beyond her district. And yet, for all her growing recognition, she carried it lightly. No entourage, no ego. Just a quiet, relentless drive to keep truth from being buried under the weight of headlines and hypocrisy. That's why this hearing mattered. She'd read every file, watched every past interview, and understood exactly how the spectacle would unfold. She knew Ivanka Trump wasn't just a person sitting across from her. She was the embodiment of a system that confused branding with integrity. Crockett had faced people like her before, just not under the blinding glare of national television. But that day, she wasn't thinking about fame. She was thinking about the young women who'd been told to wait their turn, the activists who'd burned out fighting unseen battles, the immigrants who still believed truth could pierce power. So when the camera light went red, and the world leaned in, Jasmine didn't posture or perform. She simply breathed, centered, ready. Because for her, this wasn't about confrontation, it was about correction. Not vengeance, but validation. Not proving herself, but proving something larger, that the language of truth, when spoken calmly, could still shatter the loudest lies. and as Ivanka smiled for the cameras, that same calm began to look less like politeness and more like prophecy, the kind that said, without a word, your script ends here. The hearing hadn't yet turned explosive, but the energy had shifted. The balance of power was tilting, quietly, irrevocably. And when Jasmine Crockett finally spoke, it wouldn't just be an exchange of words. It would be the moment when years of restraint met the arrogance of entitlement head-on. The reckoning was seconds away. The moment Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, the noise in the chamber seemed to fade. Reporters stopped typing. Cameras fixed their focus. Across the table, Ivanka Trump crossed one leg over the other, her smile perfectly measured, but her eyes betrayed the faintest tremor of uncertainty. Crockett's voice came low, deliberate. Ms. Trump, you've spoken about empowering women through business opportunities. I'm curious, how do you define empowerment when those same businesses benefited from government positions held by your family? The question landed like a strike. Ivanka blinked, a fraction too long. Congresswoman, I'm proud of the initiatives I've led, programs that have created thousands of jobs for women across the country. Her tone was steady, but a note of defensiveness slipped through, barely perceptible to those who didn't know the sound of fear behind composure. Crockett didn't interrupt. She waited. Let the silence grow heavy, intentional. So, she continued, no concern about conflicts of interest, even when those programs directed funds to entities connected to your family's businesses. A rustle moved through the room. Ivanka shifted, glanced toward the aides behind her, then returned to the microphone. I don't engage in politics, Congresswoman. I focus on solutions. Crockett's expression didn't change. That's convenient, she said softly. Solutions that just happened to enrich those who already had the solutions handed to them. The line hit harder than anyone expected. Even the chairman paused before regaining his composure. A few muffled gasps scattered among the audience. On the split-screen broadcast, Donald Trump's reaction flashed, a deep scowl, his lips tightening, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. He wasn't used to silence from his side of the table. He wasn't used to someone speaking to his daughter without deference. The tension became tangible. Camera zoomed in on Crockett's face, calm, unreadable, utterly in control. Ivanka took a breath, forcing another smile. Congresswoman, I don't appreciate the insinuation. Crockett met her gaze. I'm not insinuating, Ms. Trump, I'm clarifying. And in that instant, the atmosphere shifted from polite discourse to confrontation. The decorum cracked and raw truth began to show. Through the marble, the nation leaned closer. Because everyone could feel it. The explosion hadn't come yet, but it wasn't coming. It happened so fast that viewers barely had time to blink. Ivanka's smile stiffened, her breath quickened, and the cameras caught it, the first visible fracture in the Trump poise. She adjusted her microphone, tried to steady herself, but her polished confidence had begun to slip. The charm, the careful diction, all of it suddenly felt fragile under the weight of a single Congresswoman's composure. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You've said your family never used public office for personal gain, she began, each word deliberate, surgical. But records show that during your father's administration, foreign trademarks were approved for your fashion line within days of White House meetings. Is that empowerment or entitlement? A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters typed faster, cameras refocused, and even the chairman seemed unsure whether to intervene. Ivanka swallowed, her eyes darting briefly toward her counsel. With all due respect, Congresswoman, that's a mischaracterization. I've always separated my business from my public role. Crockett leaned in slightly. Separated, or rebranded. The tone wasn't mocking. It was precise, measured, the kind of question that doesn't need volume because it carries truth in its echo. The difference between privilege and service, she continued, is that one demands accountability and the other avoids it behind a smile. The line landed like a verdict. Somewhere a camera flash popped. Ivanka tried to respond, but her voice faltered, a tremor. The facade, now visibly cracking, and then, in a move that stunned everyone, Donald Trump appeared live on the broadcast, his voice booming from a remote feed, face red with fury. You don't talk to my daughter like that, he shouted, cutting across the hearing's decorum. You're disrespecting her, disrespecting this family. The room erupted. Reporters sprang to their feet, aides scrambled for order. Crockett didn't flinch. She simply turned toward the screen, eyes steady. "Mr. Trump," she said evenly, "with respect, this isn't about family. It's about facts." The silence that followed was electric. Even the chairman hesitated to speak. The split screen showed Trump's face, flushed and speechless, his jaw tight. Crockett's calm presence, unmoved, unafraid, was its own statement. Online, the explosion began instantly. Hashtags flooded in. Rancher Crockett Clapback, Narn Truth over Trump, Daughter Defense Gone Wrong. Within minutes, millions of people were replaying the clip, dissecting every micro-expression. One viral comment read, "She dismantled a dynasty without raising her voice." And that was exactly what made it unforgettable. Crockett hadn't humiliated Ivanka. She had revealed her. She hadn't silenced Donald Trump. She had made him speak on impulse without control, his anger proving the very point she'd built quietly, brick by brick. As the hearing resumed, the air never quite recovered. Ivanka's answers grew shorter. Trump's feed disconnected, and Crockett, with the softest tone imaginable, concluded, "Public service isn't about legacy, it's about integrity. Some of us earn our names, others spend a lifetime defending them." The crowd went still. You could almost hear hearts beating through the cameras. That was the moment. The mic drop heard around the country. A calm, fearless truth that no insult, no power, no dynasty could deflect. And though the hearing technically continued, everyone watching knew the story had already been written. But as history would soon show, the echo of that moment wasn't done traveling, because what happened next would turn a viral exchange into a movement. By the time the hearing adjourned, the world outside had already erupted. The clip of Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Ivanka Trump was everywhere, looping on cable news, stitched into TikToks, analyzed by pundits who hadn't stopped talking since the words left her mouth. It was more than a viral moment. It was a reckoning disguised as a soundbite. Within an hour, hashtags climbed to the top of every trending chart. Crockett Clapback was now a global conversation. Edits of the confrontation flooded social feeds. Slow-motion replays of Ivanka's stunned expression, split-screen comparisons with Donald Trump's furious outburst, and reaction videos from young viewers who'd never cared about congressional hearings until now. "This is what truth looks like," one caption read. Unbothered, unshakable, unapologetic. Cable commentators scrambled to reframe it. Some called it disrespectful, others called it historic. But among ordinary people it struck a different chord, especially with women, immigrants, and anyone who'd ever been told to stay quiet in rooms built to silence them. They saw in Jasmine's restraint not just composure, but defiance, the kind that speaks softly and still changes everything. Meanwhile, Trump's allies fumbled their defenses. Statements were issued, tweets deleted, talking points rewritten. Ivanka's PR team tried to pivot, calling the exchange a misunderstanding, but every word only deepened the impression that authenticity had finally beaten choreography. By nightfall, late-night hosts were reenacting the moment with mock intensity, turning the confrontation into both political theater and cultural touchstone. But for Crockett, it wasn't performance, it was principle. She ended her day not in a green room or a press conference, but walking alone through the quiet corridors of the Capitol, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages of gratitude. Some came from voters she'd never met. Others came from women who simply wrote, "Thank you. You said what we've been waiting to say." And as the digital world pulsed with applause, she understood something profound. This was no longer just about a hearing. It had become a symbol, a line drawn between the politics of privilege and the courage of conviction. But the real meaning of that line, and the power it unleashed, would only become clear in the days ahead. In the days that followed, the noise softened, but the meaning deepened. Had first dismissed as a viral clash, began to sound more like an anthem. One spoken not in anger, but in unwavering truth. Jasmine Crockett's words echoed beyond the walls of Congress, carried through classrooms, break rooms, and dinner tables where people had stopped believing politicians could still speak with conviction. Commentators called it the turning point, though Crockett never claimed victory. She didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. Calm strength against inherited privilege, quiet composure against manufactured grace. Her restraint had become a revelation, proof that leadership wasn't about volume or legacy. It was about values. Across social media, her quote, "Some of us earn our names," Others spend a lifetime defending them. Was printed on posters, quoted in op-eds, even painted on protest signs. To many, it was more than a line. It was a mirror. The contrast between Ivanka's practiced performance and Crockett's grounded authenticity had struck a cultural nerve. But Jasmine didn't bask in it. When asked by a reporter what she felt seeing millions celebrate her moment, she smiled faintly. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about remembering that truth still works, if you have the courage to speak it." That humility only amplified her impact. People began sharing stories of their own confrontations, with bosses, institutions, or silence itself. Crockett's composure had given them permission to believe that dignity could still win in a world addicted to spectacle. And yet, beneath the inspiration, something else stirred, a new kind of expectation. Viewers weren't just entertained, they were awakened. They wanted more leaders who didn't flinch in the face of privilege, more voices that didn't compromise their truth for applause. Because that was the lesson hidden inside the drama. Real strength doesn't shout. It stands. The hearing might have ended. The cameras might have moved on, but the energy hadn't faded. Crockett's moment had become a message, one that transcended politics entirely. In a nation divided by noise, one woman's calm had spoken louder than power itself, and the world wasn't ready to forget it. The clip would play one more time before the screen faded to black. The pause, the silence, the unflinching gaze that had left a dynasty speechless. Viewers had seen the confrontation. They'd felt the tension. But what lingered wasn't just the clash, it was the clarity. The sense that, for once, truth didn't need permission to stand tall. As the music swelled, a montage unfolded. Headlines flashing, social media comments pouring in, faces of everyday Americans watching from living rooms, subway rides, factory floors. People who had long felt invisible were now nodding, inspired, not because someone shouted for them, but because someone finally spoke with them. A voiceover cut through the noise. Moments like this don't just happen. They're made, by courage, by conviction, by those who refuse to be silenced. Then the tone shifted. Softer, inviting, personal. If you believe in that courage, if you believe that truth still matters more than privilege, then don't just scroll past. Be part of it. The screen pulsed with words: subscribe, share, speak up. But the message wasn't about clicks. It was about connection. Every share, every comment, every conversation became part of something larger, a digital echo of dignity refusing to fade. For the viewers who'd watched Jasmine Crockett stand her ground, this wasn't just entertainment. It was permission to remember who they were. The immigrant father who taught his daughter never to lower her eyes. The young voter tired of being told to wait her turn. The quiet dreamer realizing that authenticity doesn't need a stage, it needs a stand. And as the outro music carried a cinematic final note, the narrator's voice returned one last time. Empires may be built on money, names, and noise. But history remembers the ones who stood for something real. A beat of silence. Then, this is more than politics. This is personal. Subscribe, because the next story might just be yours. The screen faded to black, but in the stillness after the final frame, one truth remained clear. The world had witnessed power shaken, not by fury, but by grace. And grace had never looked this fearless.